then, without further ado, let me introduce to you a couple of people who you can also see here. Suzanne Olson is a member of the Holden Board and chairs one of its committee on guests and staff. And she's graciously agreed to be my backup, meaning if my Wi-Fi gives out or I'm suddenly stricken with some affliction, she will take over the moderator role. And then there's Maggie, or Maddie, who's in the background and who, there she is. And Maddie is providing our technical support. Holden now has a business Zoom link, and she has set up this whole thing. And so we're grateful to her for doing it and for everything going smoothly thus far. So anyway, that's the cast of characters that you can see. And without further ado now, for sure, let me introduce our executive directors, Bjorn and Elisa Peterson.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Again, my name is Elisa Peterson, and I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Bjorn Peterson, and I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. And we're so grateful to be with all of you today.
And we thought we'd take a quick moment to introduce ourselves to you all. We've met quite a few of you, but some we haven't had the chance to meet yet. So we wanted to let you all know a little bit about ourselves, and then we can launch into more about what's been going on at Holden. So I first came to Holden about 20 years ago as I was considering what was next for me after college, a very similar story for a lot of our staff, and thinking about maybe I would go volunteer at Holden for a while. But I'm not brave enough to just show up like many of our staff are for a year of my life, and decided I needed to go check it out instead. And so convinced my mother to go up to a women's retreat with me. And so we went up and attended a women's retreat and had a really wonderful experience, amazing time. Didn't end up volunteering at Holden then, but I remember one thing that really stuck with me. I knew that Holden was a place that people lived, but I couldn't quite grasp that it was truly a community, a multi-generational community. And while we were there, the year that we were there, there happened to be about half a dozen middle school aged kids that were living there with their families, attending the Narnia school. And one of the nights, there was an open mic night, and this group of girls did some kind of skit or some kind of song. I don't remember, but what I remember was how supportive and uplifting the community was of these young girls, which was such a different experience than I had in middle school, than I think a lot of people have in middle school. And I remember turning to my mom and saying, gosh, if I ever have kids, I want to come live at Holden when they're in middle school. And that stuck with me. And Bjorn and I had a chance to attend Holden together about 10 years ago. And again, we just really were drawn to the community and kept looking at ourselves and going, man, it would be so cool if we could end up here, but it never felt like the right time.
Yeah, and I first visited Holden when I was 10, and it made a big impression on me. I remember really specifically being out behind the dining hall, playing hacky sack with staff from the kitchen who just were so welcoming and welcomed me right into the circle. And it was powerful. And I remember looking up to those people and just thinking how cool they were and what a crazy cool thing they were doing out in the mountains, and made a big impression on me. So when I met Elisa, I was fortunate that Elisa chose to come and do youth encounter at that time instead of volunteering at Holden, because that's what I was doing and that's where we met. So we met in 2003 and have been together since. So that's kind of a little bit about us, but as Elisa said, there's more to our family.
Yes. So we were so thrilled to get the opportunity to come up to Holden as a family. And so this is our two kids, Magnus, who is 9 now, and Annika, who is 2.5. And our time at Holden started officially on September 1st. This was us on the bus ride up, moving up to Holden in a couple weeks before that in August. But really excited to bring our kids up to Holden and to get to experience this place as we dreamed about being there as a family. So, flash forward a few months to December, and I'm sure many of you remember the atmospheric river, especially if you lived in Washington State. Um, Lots and lots of rain came in a very short amount of time. And Holden was also very much affected by that atmospheric river. Thankfully, not the village itself, but the area around us. And so we discovered on December 11th several mudslides around the area of Holden. Those of you familiar with the layout of Holden, you might remember where Rio Tinto's water treatment plant is. It's about a mile down from Holden. And on December 11th, we woke up to a very large mudslide in between us and Rio Tinto that was not easy to cross or drive across. And as we were communicating with Rio Tinto about what they were seeing, they saw also another slide on the other side of them around mile 9 and determined that they couldn't drive down past mile 9. There is Magnus right there. And so we didn't quite know the full extent of what the damage was, but knew that we were in probably a pretty tricky predicament. Later that day, Chelan County Sheriff took a boat up to Lucerne, and they knew that there was some damage and wanted to see what they could see. And so they took a boat up to Lucerne and drove a truck up as far as they could go and could only get to mile 4 before the road was completely impassable. So as we gathered this information and really got a clearer picture of what was going on with the road, we knew that whatever was going on was not going to be easily fixed, especially since there was more rain on the way, as well as winter storms that were also predicted to come. And thankfully, we were in a window where we didn't have any guests in the village. We had just had the last guest leave a few days earlier. We were getting ready to welcome guests for the Christmas holiday, but no one had been there yet. And so it was just staff. And so we made the decision that we were going to evacuate the majority of our staff on December 13th. And that involved helicopters because the road was completely impassable. And so on December 13th, we evacuated 39 adults and 3 children, as well as a pet parrot. And we shuttled them down from the landing zone in Holden Village, which is over kind of by the garages, if you know where that is, down to Lucerne. And after everyone was shuttled down to Lucerne, then they took the boat down and departed at Fields Point. And just to give some kind of context to this, our staff who did amazing, everything went so smoothly and so well with this evacuation, but they had about 24 hours notice that this was going to happen. 24 hours notice that they were going to have to leave their homes, leave their jobs, leave their community for an indefinite amount of time. And everyone could only pack about 1 bag's worth of things. And so everyone had to leave the majority of their possessions in the village and leave with what they could carry. So we were able to do this evacuation of the majority of staff on December 13th, and a small team stayed behind in the village. They were continuing to winterize the buildings, continuing to assess the situation and figure out kind of where were we and what were we going to do next. And as more storms came in and as there were just riskier working conditions, we temporarily evacuated that remaining group on December 20th, again by helicopter, and were able to get them back up into the village just a couple of weeks later. And so since then, we have had a crew up in the village continuously, and we'll continue to have a village in the crew as long as we can safely do so. Here are some pictures from some of the folks who have been up in the village since January. And so right now we have anywhere between 10 to 15 folks that are up in the village. We have power, we have communications. Every 3 weeks, we do a resupply trip by helicopter. So we bring in food, other supplies that people might need, as well as give some people a chance to come down lake and get a break and others to go up. As you can imagine, living in such a small community and really rugged and rustic conditions can be quite hard. So we're making sure that all of our team members get regular breaks and come down lake. But they've been doing great work, continuing to care for the village, really looking at the systems that we have, and thankfully there's been no damage that has occurred to the village itself. Additionally, we also have our staff of about 18 other folks who are working down lake remotely. we knew that we needed to continue some of the really essential and important work at Holden Village. So we now have a hybrid team with our in-village crew as well as our down lake crew. And our down lake crew is predominantly focused on kind of the administrative and business side of things. So finance, IT, as well as fundraising and communications and programs and all of the amazing events. Maybe you've had a chance to attend them out in the community, but really trying to think about how can we continue programming and continue really great engagement with our community, even though we're closed. And so now that we have kind of gotten through these first few months of this kind of new situation with the road closed, we're moving on to what's next and how do we prepare for reopening and when even will we reopen?
Yeah. So as the seasons have changed, what we've been able to finally start getting the assessments done along the road. And we'll share in the next several slides some of the information that has been made available to us by Rio Tinto and the U.S. Forest Service that helps kind of give a sense of what they're finding now that the snow and ice have receded and they're able to really uh, go and check out these different slide areas. So I will say as we get into this, two things. One, some of this is going to feel pretty dramatic, and if you haven't seen it yet, it is a bit overwhelming. So as I say this, I just want to reiterate to everyone that the only thing we've heard from Rio Tinto and from, more importantly, the U.S. Forest Service is that they will reopen the road. So despite the catastrophic failures that we're going to show you, there is active work going on to address these situations and find more permanent, sustainable solutions to them. But it is important to kind of start with what our reality is. And so our reality is that between miles 4 and 9, there are basically 11 points of catastrophic geotechnical failure. And what that really means is that there are at least 11 areas where the integrity of the road has been compromised to a substantial degree. And so you can see here that almost every half mile, 3/4 mile, there's another area of concern. Um, but we'll start by showing you some of the latest pictures that we have. These are a few weeks old now, but you can get a sense of kind of the size of things. So one thing that I want to do, I'm going to try to use my cursor to demonstrate, but on the left-hand picture, you can see that the slide starts up pretty high on the mountain. But this line across the middle, this is the road, right? So that's 8301. So you can see that quite a lot of material came down. And what the geotechnical engineers and geomorphologists are hypothesizing happened was that it seems as though the culverts that went under the road at mile 4 or so, right at the Old Faithful avalanche slide area, for those of you who are familiar, that the materials clogged up those culverts to the extent that the water started to run over the top of the road and eroded beneath the road, downslope from the road surface, causing an entire section to slide down together at some point. What they also have found is that down at the creek bottom, so much material and energy came down that the material actually made its way all the way across the creek onto the other side of the bank, and they believe it might have temporarily dammed Railroad Creek until the water pushed its way back through. On the right side, you'll see um, a picture. You can kind of see the road that comes through and where it would be. And this area, what they have found is that there's about 10 feet of soil on top of bedrock. And what happened during this event was that if you imagine like a piece of marble or glass that has some dirt on it, if you add enough water, all of a sudden that starts to slide along it and it doesn't have a lot of resistance because there's not much friction. And with only 10 feet of soil, there's not a lot to capture all that moisture. So it ended up being a pretty substantial slide. Yeah. Here's a picture that demonstrates some of that bedrock, right? There's some bedrock down in the middle of this space with soils and rocks piled on top. And so part of what they're trying to figure out is how much material came down and what could we expect in another similar sort of um, situation. Initially there were talk about the size of the storm and how big was it and how historical was it. Um, what we're hearing most recently is that this was seen as probably a storm on the 30-year scale, meaning that it's the kind of storm you might experience or expect every 30 years or so on average. And so that's part of what they need to understand in order to engineer the correct road is how frequent of a situation are we facing and at what should we do from an engineering standpoint to mitigate potential damage in the future. Here's that's Here's one last view of the mile 4 slope. You can see that dotted red line is the road level, and so this is taken from down below. One more, I think. This is much further down, and you can see this is at the creek level, and this is all that material that came all the way down to the road. And there's a couple of people there for reference for size. One of the things that we're not able to see or really get a sense of until the last month or so is tension cracks. And so there are several areas besides the big slide areas, there are several areas where you have evidence of slope instability. And what that just means is that, again, underneath the road, the integrity of the road bed is not where it needs to be. And what we've heard even just this week is that these continue to be found to be moving. And so some of the road movement is not fully finished. And the thing that you want to worry about with these tension cracks, so we're about to show a picture, and just to let you know, this picture is a demonstration. It's an illustration of what can happen when you have a tension crack that continues to develop, but it is not of Holden. It's a little dramatic. So,
Hold on.
sorry, this is being very weird.
There.
There you go. So this is in Wyoming, you can see, but this is an example of what went on a road that first showed those kind of tension cracks, but then it continued to fail. And so you get that kind of rotational landslide that you see in the illustration. There are several other areas with washouts. Here are a couple more pictures of the kind of thing we're looking at. This is on the left, the picture shows about a 20-foot sort of gouge where the water and material ran out through the road area. And on the right, you see an example of rerouted streams. There's several places where streams were rerouted, not where they originally or traditionally flow. One example of that was the 10 Mile Creek just below the falls for a while jumped its bank and was sending water and streams down over our Holden's
What? Septic field.
yeah, septic field, sorry. Thankfully that water is in its traditional route again, and so but it's the kind of thing we've got to watch. And one other thing you'll note is that it Railroad Creek seems to have also shifted in its path a bit. And so one of the things that the engineers are looking at is what's the effect of the new creek bed route on the road bed and how are those things going to interact in the future. So one last picture here for you that kind of shows yet another washout area where you've got a large amount of just mud and sand that's settled at the base. A lot of what is trying to happen right now is they're trying to do a lot of mapping of the upslope and downslope flow possibilities for any kind of slides in the future. And the last couple of weeks, Rio Tinto has been flying LiDAR radar up and down the valley with drones to map the new geomorphology and try to have a better sense and a better baseline for both how to deal with the road as well as what it's going to mean for avalanches and other kind of risks in the future. So that reconnaissance has been ongoing. It got underway in March, picked up quite a lot of steam in April, and they will continue to monitor some things. They're continuing to monitoring, for instance, those tension cracks to see how much they're moving or if they'll be done moving or not. So all of that is kind of a piece of what they're working on to better understand what repairs are required, what kind of engineering they need to take into place. And then finally, to kind of work out among the different players how this road is going to get fixed and on what timeline. We continue to get uh, kind of an interesting take on the situation. Many of you will know that early on, we talked a lot about the ERFO process. That was the process that was kind of suggested to us would be the legal framework within which the road would be repaired. And I think for the first couple of months that was the case. But as the Forest Service, the Justice Department, Rio Tinto, and others continued to look at it, I think it began to be clear that CERCLA, the environmental cleanup of Superfund sites, that legal structure would actually be the one in which this process is going to probably unfold. And so there are conversations being had among the different players in the Holden Mine remediation project universe to try to understand exactly what this is going to look like. Now, the consequences for Holden are kind of twofold in that. One is that I think it's it's to Holden's benefit, hopefully, in both the speed at which things will happen and the quality with which the road will be rebuilt will likely be better for Holden because of Rio Tinto's involvement and the CERCLA project involvement. Um, the trade-off is that it can be a little less transparent. It's harder sometimes for us to know because there's delicate and complicated negotiations going on throughout all of that. So it requires us to have a little bit of trust, which admittedly is easier some days than others. But we have worked hard, Elisa and I, but others, Stacy, Mark, and Kathy before us, and others have worked hard to build good relationships, both with Rio Tinto's leadership and with the U.S. Forest Service. And so, we're working in good faith and doing everything we can to assist in these things, ask important questions, and we meet regularly every couple of weeks, basically, with all these different players to get updates on what's happening, what they're finding, and what the implications of all that are.
And a general timeline is it's hard to nail down, but the hope is that these assessments will be able to be completed by probably June, and that will give a better picture of the scope of work that needs to be done, and then can begin the process of whatever bidding or contracting needs to happen. They're optimistic that some repair work can start this summer, but we also have to remember that the season with which we can work on the road is much shorter than other places because once we have snow, now we have active avalanche zones and active avalanche chutes again. So we've got a limited amount of time that work could be done if it does start this summer. So what it sounds like people are hopeful is that work can start this summer, but probably will not be completed until 2027. And how far into 2027 is also still very unknown.
One of the key questions for us in May of 2026 then is what are the implications of all this for our wildfire season? It is, many of you are from the Pacific Northwest, but if you are not, you may not be aware that it was a pretty poor season for snowpack. And so there's quite a high level of concern within the Forest Service, emergency services spaces, with us and Rio Tinto about what the fire season could look like. And uh, of course, for Holden, not having the road as our main means of quickly evacuating the village means that um, we want to be really mindful about the kind of activities that we're doing, what kinds of contingency plans do we have, what are we going to do if and when a fire is in the area, and how do we do everything we can to prepare. So a lot of that work, we're a couple of months into that preparation work right now. We've had meetings specifically the last 2 weeks with the Forest Service, as well as Chelan County Emergency Management, um, Rio Tinto, others that are stakeholders in the valley to try to understand best what can we expect this year. And one thing that has been clear, I would say even as early as January and February, is that with the road closed, the people in Chelan County Emergency Management and at the Forest Service are pretty nervous that we're still up there. They understand that we're doing our best to take care of the systems, but it's also clear that they'd rather we not be there for just the simple fact that any kind of emergency, which is always difficult to deal with at Holden, is just made a little bit harder right now. So what we've been doing is trying to get a sense of, some basic questions of how are they thinking about the wildfire season and in what conditions might they send, for instance, hot shots or smoke jumpers or any kind of wildfire fighting team into the village, and what can we expect in terms of the kinds of cooperation that we might offer or benefit from. And so those questions have been um, at the heart of our preparations. Um, yeah, I think we could probably return to some of this in a little bit, but I think one of the main takeaways for us is that um, they intend to be far out in advance of any risk they perceive to the human safety of people in Railroad Creek Valley. So the road 8301 remains closed from basically the dock in Lucerne all the way through to the ball field. Holden Village applied for and was given um, exceptions or permission for up to 15 people to be in the village and utilize the road because that's a pretty important part of what we do. And so that has been an important piece for us to get. And now what we're kind of working on is what how can we continue to cooperate with these groups so that we can get the kind of seasonal expertise up in the village that we need to continue to working on special projects, including the fire skirting work that we've been doing. There's a lot of different projects that it would be great to work on with the village on close to guests. However, there's only so much risk that we can add to our scenario without, potentially changing the way Chelan County or the Forest Service sees the village. So that's the kind of work we're doing. Our risk and safety lead, as well as our various managers, are all working diligently on plans and evacuation scenarios and updating those from what we've done historically. Uh, we're still just a family around here, so you're going to see kids popping in and out. So please forgive me for being a dad. Um, but all that to say that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we keep people as safe as possible, and then to do everything we can ahead of time so that the village itself is as protected in a wildfire scenario as it can be. Um, there's a more that maybe could be said in there, but I think that kind of, well, I'll leave it there for the moment. Um, so again, a big part of what we're doing right now is trying to prepare for the wildfire season, understand what the situation might entail, and how we'll be prepared to deal with those eventualities should they arrive.
So we want to talk too just a little bit about what else we're working on. Obviously, these are very big and important things, but there's also much more that our team and our community are focused on as well. And so during this time, during this recovery period, we have three main priorities. The first priority is ensuring the long-term health of the village infrastructure. A lot of the work that the in-village crew has been doing has been looking at our systems and seeing ways to improve them, to be able to handle these evacuations more smoothly so that we mitigate the risk to the village when these will happen again, because that's our sense. It's not if, but when. And also, as we have moved many of our staff members down lake, that has meant translating a lot of our system processes to systems that can now work remotely. When we are all in the village, there's lots of things that work differently than when we're trying to operate remotely. So there's been a lot of work in really looking at our infrastructure, how to set ourselves up for success in the future in order to be able to be resilient and to be able to weather future situations where we may have to be outside the village or may have to have a hybrid staff like we do right now. Our second big focus has been around supporting and connecting with our staff and community members. So as I mentioned earlier, when we evacuated our staff, folks had to leave with not a lot of time's notice. They had to leave most of their possessions behind. Many of our staff lost their jobs and their community in less than 24 hours. And so we've continued to try to find ways to support the mental health of our staff as well as connect them to resources. I will say that in the days after the evacuation, we were so grateful for the outpouring of support from the community that every single person had a place to be for as long as they needed to be there. Some people only needed a place for a couple of days. Some people needed a couple of weeks to figure out what's next. And our community has been so generous in that. And we're so grateful for that. But we know that these staff are continuing to try to find work, try to find what's next. And so continuing to see ways that we can support the staff that had to evacuate, as well as connecting with the community. You may have seen us out on the road already, or maybe you've just seen our newsletters full of all of the different events that are going on. We've been really trying to take advantage of this time when we're not so concentrated in the village to get out and connect with congregations, connect with other groups, come up with virtual programming, other ways that we can continue to connect as a community, as Holden Village, even when we can't physically be together. And lastly, we're preparing right now for reopening. We don't know when that's going to be. We hope we get some more clarity in the next month or so as the assessments continue and there's a better picture of what road repair will look like. But there's work we can do now to be ready to reopen. So we're working very thoughtfully with our team to set some really clear goals and set some really clear plans so that once we know when that happens, we have months to prepare and to ramp everything up so that we're ready to reopen and ready to welcome guests back to the village. And so with that, I think we will, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Mark, we are welcome to turn it over to questions.
Well, thank you very much for that remarkably thorough report. And by the way, the board learned some new things too, because the whole process of road assessment and everything is changing on a daily basis. So I was really grateful to you for, sharing with all of us some of those slides and some of those updates. So I'm going to go through the questions here, just a couple of things. Some of these questions that I'm about to go through really are addressed as much to the board as they are to you. So let me just say a few things in response to what you said, and then in response to some of the questions that were submitted before throwing it back into your report. I mean, first, just to pick up on one of the things you said just in passing, Bjorn, apologizing for being a dad. You certainly should never have to do that for multiple reasons. But one of the reasons I want to share with the listeners here is that the board, even before this catastrophe, had begun starting to talk through the future of the village. And one of the emphases that the two of you brought and that many board members resonated to was to make Holden in the future a more family friendly place. And the board is fully on, if you will, on board with that emphasis. And we think of it as a great virtue that we have executive directors with a family up there, even though it has presented some unbelievable challenges for you to live through this whole experience with a family. As far as the future is concerned and the whole business of reopening, I'll just respond in this way. The board has not itself addressed that matter, but it has put in place a certain process which will be vital to making determinations about that. We're due as a village for strategic planning. Our present strategic plan, with its 4 pillars, has been in place for over 5 years now. And so the board is already in the process of strategic planning for the future. And a lot of that conversation that we have begun to work through in the April meeting and will work through in more depth in June will be taken up with this very question. Not so much when we reopen, but as we reopen, how do we as a Holden community regard that reopening? Is it a complete reset? Is it maintaining continuity more than change? Is it, I mean, hundreds of questions, but we do have in place a process, strategic planning, one process, which is a kind of locus for deliberating about those issues in partnership, of course, with the executive directors and other staff, and in partnership with the entire Holden community, who has to be a part in some way or another of this whole new strategic planning venture. So that's my response to the third question, or the third set of questions about the reopening. So I want to now go back to the questions you submitted. And first of all, the road. You talked a lot about the road. A number of the questions we received were concerned about this whole Forest Service relationship that you mentioned. And that has to do with a lot of people's memories about the Forest Service being extremely cooperative with Holden and seeing Holden as a kind of gem of the Railroad Creek Valley, but recognizing that it itself is under a lot of pressure. I mean, we're all very familiar with the effect of the federal cuts on many agencies, not least of all the Forest Service. And we're wondering, or the questioners are wondering, about the whole business with the road, which is its road, and in particular, how you regard our relationship with them in this whole minuet of them, Holden, Rio Tinto, and the whole Circleside business that you alluded to.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And I mean, that is so much at the crux of our sort of external partnership relationships is those various stakeholders that are involved in the Circla site project itself, as well as our status as a special use permit holder and what the kind of assumed relationship and responsibilities we then have also to Chelan County. So some of this is a little bit convoluted, and I won't try to get into all of it today, but I will say that overall, the partnership is very much still in place between Holden Village and the Forest Service. Last summer, some of you know, Holly Crake became the new district forest ranger for the Chelan Forest District. And Holly's been great to work with. Holly's visited the village several times and has made herself available to us on several occasions. And Holly is the one who kind of, under her remit, is everything from wildfire kind of management to um, uh, the recreational use of the valley and our particular special user permit. And so we have the relationship with Holly that we work on, and that's who, when we talk about partnering with the Forest Service on everything from special use of the road during its closure to having conversations with her and the Forest Service team around wildfire response, that's especially kind of in her side of the ledger. And the other side is Molly Hanson, who's the mine water or the mine site remediation project manager. And so Holly and Molly have two different parts, and Molly then being to do with the mine site remediation is a regional Forest Service employee rather than a forest-based employee, but they're both in the Wenatchee area. So they're both heavily involved with Holden Village's life up there. And part of, I think, what has happened and what's of interest to Holden is that I think in the beginning, the thought that this was going to be a Holly side of the ledger road repair project. And that eventually what happened was that the Forest Service, and also with conversations with the Department of Justice, realized that it's actually a Molly side of the ledger project, right? So it moved from something that was kind of standard US Forest Service to special project US Forest Service. Now, at first, you go, well, did that slow us down? Is that antagonistic? Is there a problem there? And I think the answer is no, but it does sort of change the process and the questions that get asked from this rather standardized version that we had and thought we were going to walk initially to the somewhat more opaque and complex, but ultimately perhaps more efficient in the sense of how quickly something will happen for us. And I think the important thing for Holden folks to understand, really, uh, among other things, is that the Forest Service does not necessarily have a legal responsibility to reopen Forest Service 8301 for Holden Village, but it does have that legal responsibility for the mine remediation site because they are legally obligated to clean up that mine. So Holden benefits from the fact that they were legally required to get that road open to a good standard as fast as they can for that. And we will benefit from that because we share that road. So that's an important thing, and it's another interesting sort of twist in the long intertwining relationship between the Holden mine site and Holden Village. And it continues to change and evolve, but that's a big piece of this. So the relationship with the Forest Service is good. The relationship with Chelan County is also good. And they're an important part of this too, because as special use permit holders, we we own the buildings of Holden Village, but we do not own the land. We lease use of the space. And that is important because it means that during a level 3 evacuation, for instance, our special use permit is dependent on our ongoing cooperation with local emergency management um, responders. And so big part of what we're doing is we're convening. We've convened it twice in the last 10 days, meetings of Forest Service workers from both sides of that ledger that I described, as well as Chelan County as well as some folks who are supporting the mine remediation project and health. And we've had people from county commissioners and community development officers and others all involved in these meetings to make sure that we are operating with as much communication and transparency as possible. We're on the same page. And so we're in a good spot. But we also recognize sort of the limits of what we're able to do, and we're trying to navigate those together.
Thank you. Talk a little bit more about Rio. I mean, we know on the board, and we know about your work with Rio, and we know about the relationship we forged there. But some of the people on this list may not know. I mean, Rio is there permanently with this huge installation about a half a mile down from Holden in the purification plant. And they were immediately out of there when the atmospheric river came through. Even before Holden evacuated, they completely left. And so, as you just said so well, it's to our advantage that they need to get that road repaired soon, and that the Forest Service is legally obliged to do that for them, if not for Holden, and not actually for Holden. So that's an important thing to note. So could you talk a little bit about your conversations with Rio as through this whole process?
Yeah. So Rio Tinto, we initially kind of coordinated our conversations and response in the first 24 to 36 hours when the slides came down, and had a lot of kind of what are you seeing, what are you thinking kind of conversations. And ultimately we made the determination to leave, to have the majority of our staff evacuated. And they shortly after they decided to as well. And but part of it is that they can completely shut down the plant and evacuate in about a 2 hour window because of the way their systems are built, because of the size of their staff and all of that. So it took them a lot less time to get ready to go. And they remained out of the valley until I think March 9th or so. So whereas there were no Holden staff in the village for about 10 days at one point, but from that point on, since January 1st, there's been Holden staff in the village. There are still not resident caretaker teams or anything at Rio Tinto, and they probably will not reestablish a full-time team there anytime soon for a number of reasons. They do want to get things back up, but for instance, whereas we're using helicopters relatively frequently, helicopter flight is not something that's not a risk that they accept. Um, Similarly, I think they had slides on three sides of them. So there's also concern about the integrity and the safety of their site, and they want to explore what that looks like. But Ken Espelita, the asset manager for this site, has been somebody that we've talked to several times. We text with him, we talk with him, we share ideas. That relationship has remained strong. And I would say that a big piece of kind of what we're seeing now and why things are starting to pick up is that Rio Tinto has been back in the valley, bringing engineers in, spending a lot of money, frankly, on assessment work and evaluation work that is probably far beyond what you might see in another situation. So what that also means is that the water treatment plant has not been running since December 13th. And so one of the questions we do get a lot is, kind of what's the situation with that? The important things to remember there are first that most of the worst and dirtiest water is actually captured inside the cavity of the mine in the mountain. The water that passes through the tailings, that is not contaminated to quite the same level. And so what's interesting, why that's important is the stuff that's in the mountain actually is being captured back behind the huge bulkheads that are in there. And they can capture that water for, I've heard 1 to 2 years, depending on flow rates and different things. Um, but some amount of time before it would overflow and begin running back into the creek. Um, the water that's passing through the tailings is being captured, and that is getting that at first went into the holding tank, the settling ponds that are kind of down there by their treatment facility, and then eventually, probably within about a week, that reached its capacity and started overflowing. The tests that they've done on the creek so far have all been down in the Lucerne area, but they show no cause for concern from a human health and safety standpoint, um, according to both Rio Tinto and the Forest Service. So that's what we're hearing there. I know they're anxious to get back. Some people have wondered out loud, like, do they want to get back? Or they, I think the longer their systems go unmanaged, the more concerned they are too about damage and things like that. So I think there's a number of reasons to believe that Rio Tinto would like to get back up and operating as quickly as they can.
And I think another important factor to why they're not back operating yet is that they run on diesel power. And so with the road out, they don't have a safe way to get diesel up in order to power the plant. So that's going to be probably one of the big decision factors for them of when they can reopen is when the road is in a safe enough condition that you could drive a diesel tank up and be able to bring the diesel that they need to generate power for the plant.
So, as a follow-up, does that mean it's conceivable that the road could be repaired in phases, that is, such that it could be passable for one lane to get a truck up there and maybe some supplies to Holden, but not fully passable? Is that a scenario that's possible to contemplate?
Yeah, that is a scenario, and that's one that we've kind of broached with Holly. Does she see as a world where maybe there's a limited use that we could have of the road before it's fully reopened? And I think everyone thinks that if it can't be done in one fell swoop, if it needs to be phased across seasons because of the weather and because of how long it will take, I think the hope is that it could be at a place where maybe we can switch to driving a truck, a single truck along a one track road, but would still not be open enough that we could drive school buses and welcome guests back.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I have another question here that was submitted, but before I raise that, let me remind people that they may put into the chat a question that has occurred to them. I check the chat regularly, and I will offer as many questions that appear in the chat as I can. But I'm still on the list that were submitted otherwise. And here's the question. The Forest Service is even more critical in the whole matter of the forthcoming fire season. That is to say, they are the ones who are naturally more cautious, as you put it, Bjorn, given the lack of an egress, in determining what evacuation levels to determine under what conditions and so on. And I would remind the people here are tuned in that as we put in the communication to the village, the board voted in the April meeting that whatever happens, whatever contingencies arise, we expect to completely comply with the law in terms of evacuation and evacuation declarations by the Chelan Sheriff's Office as well as the Forest Service. And so I just wanted to stress that. So what I want to ask within that framework is, to what extent do you think the Forest Service is aware of the fact that if all of the staff evacuates and no one's there, they might need to do something like what they did with the Wolverine fire and have on that helicopter that's picking up people, one or two people to see to it that the rainbirds are working and that there's no stray embers? I mean, are they in a
Yeah.
mindset that they would be willing to see to it that the village is never completely empty in the fire season, or is that still under negotiation?
Yeah, I would say the main the main piece there is kind of twofold. One to answer the first part, the Forest Service is ready and willing to bring firefighting crews into the village this summer, and I think would begin their operations from a fairly normal standpoint. The difference, I would say, that what's new is that with the road closed, um, they have made clear that they're going to have a much more conservative and far out ahead of things approach than they have had, previously. We raised just this week this question of kind of, our ability to cooperate with the Forest Service during a wildfire situation, both in the hospitality ways that have happened at different times, as well as the particular technical skills and abilities that we're able to offer around things like rainbirds and other stuff like that. Um, what we've been told is that I don't we are looking for ways to make available the information that we would give them in such a scenario without necessarily having somebody on the ground. I think, a lot of people think to the 2015 Wolverine fire when thinking about these things. And um, at that time our rainbirds were brand new. They had only been really hooked up that summer. That was sort of the first application of them. But since then, the Forest Service has, sort of toured annually our spaces to varying extents and been able to learn more about the systems as well as we're trying to think about ways that we can make that documented and be able to share it with them. The big concern in all of this is is really about um, the risk both to whoever that person might be from Holden, but as well as the risk to uh, hotshot crews and other wildland firefighters. The issue that we want to avoid and that the emergency management folks are looking to avoid this summer is a situation where we have people in the village who are not able to assist in a dangerous, wildfire situation, and that the airspace in Railroad Valley would become conflicted because you would be having, just like we had last summer, lots of helicopter travel up and down the valley for wildfire suppression and potentially any and all wildland firefighters are coming potentially in via helicopter. So if you have to coordinate our private helicopter evacuation plan in the midst of all of that, with limited landing zones around the valley and around the area, does it put people at risk in ways that are unreasonable? But I think at the heart of this question is partially a fear and an understanding that if there are no Holden people in the village, then the village is doomed. And that is something that A is I don't think is really true, but B, we've been working hard since December to ensure that we have documented systems, documentation of how to safely wind systems down, turn them off where necessary, and to have the village in a state of preparation, and then do all that defensible work ahead of time. So the question is an important one, and it's complicated, and certainly it will also unfold within negotiations between us and the Forest Service and Chelan County. But, the question in some ways has been, will we negotiate with the Forest Service for a particular way of cooperating in a
I see.
wildfire situation? And the assumption there has always been that the Forest Service would say yes, right? We have not done that in sort of defiance of those local emergency management partners. It wasn't done in defiance in 2015. It was done in cooperation. And what we're hearing is that they just don't want to put people in that position. And I think the important thing to remember too is that, in times like 2015 or 2025, Holden has gone through emergency management scenarios where we've taken away lessons as a community. And we've said, well, our lesson in this is that, hey, we actually can provide an important element here. Well, the other side of that is that Chelan County and the Forest Service learn their own lessons in these scenarios, and they may very well draw different conclusions than we would about what went on and what the appropriate and safe way to manage those risks are in the next scenario. And so it's a dance, it's a conversation, and we really rely on very good, regular communications and strong relationships with those people so that we can keep as much of that decision making in our hands, the collective hands of Holden Village. But if and when it gets to a point where they're saying to us, it's time to go, we have enough trust in the relationship that we're not second guessing them either. And we're not saying, well, is it really time to go? We're saying, okay, if you're saying it's time to go, it's time to go. And we're going to do everything to get out of your way so that you can come in and do your work and the job that you're an expert in and provide what you can to protect Holden Village. So that's a really important piece of all this for us.
And before you jump to the next question, Mark, I just want to offer a clarification for folks. So we have disabled the chat, but there is a Q&A button. So if you want to submit questions, you can push that Q&A button and type your questions there, and then we can see those questions.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. I'm sorry I had misunderstood a little bit about the technology there, but I will keep my eye on this Q&A. There's only really one remaining question that came in, which simply has to do with how the two of you are doing. A couple of people who wrote in to me personally said, could they talk a little bit about their frame of mind and their whole experience through this process and how they're doing?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking how we're doing. Yeah, I think, it has been not at all what we expected for our first 7 months as executive directors. Where we're at right now, so our family is now living in Chelan. We found a small house in Chelan to rent. Our son is going to the public school in Chelan, and our daughter is going to some preschools here. And so this is kind of our home base while we're waiting for the village to open. One of us goes up to the village every couple of months along to join the in-village crew. But this was a good place for us to be. So transitioning to life in Chelan, I think, has been helpful in at least giving us a place to land. Chelan is lovely in the spring. If you've never been to Chelan in the spring before, highly recommend it. But yeah, I think we're doing all right. Our kids transitioned to life down here pretty well. They're pretty resilient, which is great, and we're grateful for that. I think in terms of kind of us and leading Holden, we both had different experiences with the evacuation. I happened to be down lake during the evacuation. I left the village on December 10th for what was supposed to be a 2-day trip to run a really quick errand. And so my experience of the evacuation was much different than Bjorn, and I think we're processing it in different ways based on what we experienced as part of that. But I think that in terms of kind of being part of Holden and thinking about Holden, I really have found opportunities to see where there is a gift in this moment to evaluate things, to look at how we're doing things, to find different ways to connect, to find different ways to focus. I think you've probably seen that as our team has been really reaching outward and being out in the community and thinking about different ways to connect with people. I think it's also the work that we're doing around the resilience of Holden and preparing systems to be better than they were so that they're more easy to walk away from, they're more easy to shut down, as well as we're preparing for reopening, really thinking about, yes, we want to go back to the village that we love and the traditions that we love, but there were a lot of things at Holden that weren't working well, but we did them because that's the way we've always done them. There were systems that we had, there were processes that we had. And so we're trying to also use this time to really think about, can we make improvements now so that the village we go back to is even better? And so I've been able to really find hope in that and really find a lot of energy in, we can't be at the village, but we can be doing things to make it better. And that's been a really helpful driver for me in this time.
Yeah, and I think for me it's been similar. I really benefited from being out in the community and visiting different congregations. I was at the Northwest Intermountain Synod Assembly of the ELCA last weekend and made great connections there. Um, and I will say too that one of the big things that certainly we thought about right after all this was, man, we're about to probably lose all of summer 2026 revenue, where we lost Christmas, we lost the spring. How's this all going to go financially? Given that Holden was in the position it needed to be looking at its business model in general. And I think what's great is that there's been an incredible outpouring of support, not just in the kind of emergency response of the first month or two, but it's ongoing. I think some of you may have heard before that our budget for this fiscal year originally called for fundraising of the amount of about $550,000. But once we looked at, what we were going to lose, we revised that goal to look at trying to raise $1.5 million this fiscal year. And we've just recently crossed the $1 million mark. And that has not been, I don't think, with anyone having to sell their favorite possessions in order to keep Holden alive. What it points to is the capacity that we have in this community. And it also helps highlight a way forward for Holden, which is going to, I think, be important. And that is to understand that it's been a while since the revenue from our registration fees have covered the costs of running Holden Village. And that reality is probably not changing. I think in order for Holden to thrive and for all of us to have the experiences at Holden that we want to have, it's going to take a philanthropic footprint larger than what we've historically had. And what we're seeing now is that we can and should be doing that. And it means too that those of us who give to Holden are going to be giving not just because it's a great experience for our family when we go, but because it's something that has an important mission in the world. And we believe it should exist not just for our own recreation or regeneration, but something that should support the greater community. And we're seeing that, and we have full faith that that's going to continue. So that has helped me a lot, just to connect it back to the original question, because it can be isolating, and certainly in the early weeks and months, and especially when we were just out at the lake house, it was pretty isolating. It's not as remote as Holden, but it might be more isolating to live at the lake house than up in Holden. And so it's been good to reconnect with people here in Chelan, throughout the region, and then to have events, all over the country and even all over the world. So that's been a real balm for me, and has um, gone a long way to helping strengthen my uh, hope and resolve in what we're going to do and experience going forward. So we're not through this. We've got a long way to go still, unfortunately. But I will say I'm more convinced than ever that Holden Village community has the capacity to get there and to get through this and to come out even stronger. And we're excited to see that taking place.
And I want to pick up on a thread that Bjorn was talking about related to the generosity of this community, how we've managed through financially. I think there was a question that came through about that in the Q&A as well. So when this first started and the first, month, we were really trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? And thankfully, Holden has a legacy of generosity. First, in all of the volunteers that have been coming to Holden for decades, Holden was built on the generosity of our community. But we also have many generous people who have made gifts to Holden over the years, often as part of their estate, that have gone into investments. And we have some significant investments that are thankfully there for times just like this. And so as we were working with the board, with the finance committee, trying to figure out what does this mean for our budget, we knew that thankfully we had some very strong investments that we could draw on to get us through. We have not had to touch those investments yet because you all have been so generous. We thought for sure by now we would, but as Bjorn said, we just crossed $1 million raised for Holden to support our recovery, and it hasn't slowed down. And I'm going to say here, wouldn't it be amazing if we didn't have to touch our investments this year? But the 1.5 million that we're raising is going a long way to helping us get there. And so it's been incredible to see the ways that this community is standing up, has been standing up. This again, we have a legacy of generosity.
Mhm.
We have a legacy of philanthropy. And it's really exciting to see it kind of evolve into this next phase that will take us even further in the future once we're able to reopen and really continue to lean on philanthropy to really plan for what's next.
Thank you both. This is a remarkable set of comments because it anticipates one of the questions in the Q&A, which is, how is Holden doing financially? You've answered that. I just want to underscore what you said, Elisa, by letting people know that her background is in development, her professional background and training. And I think the board believes, I certainly do, that we're in better shape now on that whole advancement side in terms of the staff, in terms of the energy, and in terms of the expertise that we have ever been in as a village. So it came at the right time. And I just wanted to let you all know that that's Elisa's background. So when she speaks about this, she speaks with authority. So the next thing that has come in on the chat, which is a very small, or the Q&A is a very small question, is will Rio resume medical backup?
I think the answer to that is in time. I think they will. I think they're willing to, but I don't know what the function there has been that as when Rio Tinto had people just in the Rio Tinto lodge and mine water treatment facility, that tended to be where their medic hung out, and they were available to back up to us when needed. Occasionally, they were not available because there was a more dangerous operation happening, say up in the mine or in the portals or something like that, and they would kind of let us know. My guess is that, and I don't know this for certain yet, but my guess is that if they have a medical professional on site this in the coming months, that person would probably be down closer to where some of the heavy equipment operation would be happening and so on. And so I think we'll hope to reestablish that backup whenever possible. But as of now, we don't know when that'll be, or we don't know when they will next have a medic back in the valley, and we don't know if that medic will have capacity to back up Holden yet. But in the meantime, we've done a lot to beef up our risk and safety culture. Just by way of example, every week after our staff meeting, our risk and safety lead or other managers help in the village help do a tabletop exercise that runs through various emergency scenarios in order to make sure that the team is well drilled on what to do in an emergency. Of course, that's not new. Like we've been responding to emergencies for a long time, but to make that a weekly practice where the entirety of the village comes together and talks through, okay, Steve is on his way out to hydro and he slips and breaks his leg and he can't fly for 3 days. What are we doing? Right. And you go through it. And those are the kind of scenarios that our team needs to be prepped on. And so we continue to make those preparations wherever we can.
Thank you. There are two more questions. I'll answer one because it's easy, and I'll throw the last one of the day back to you two because I am not sure how to answer it. So the one I can answer is this. Someone asked, well, how many people are listening here? And the exact answer is 42 people. I don't think that number means much, partly because not only is there another iteration of this next Saturday, but also because we're taping it. And as I said at the beginning, you're going to be getting the link to that. And I think a lot of villagers are keenly interested in this, but are in effect not able to attend either of these two times. So I would just ask the person who asked the question and everybody listening, if you found this really helpful, get the word out there to your friends that they should tune in next Saturday, or they should be alert to when the link comes in for the recording of this. So anyway, here's the last question. And it's, do you have any pressing issues, Bjorn and Elisa, where a collection of specialists or experts in an ad hoc committee would be beneficial? And what ad hoc committees currently exist? Obviously, somebody who wants to provide more help and assistance.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I will say, we learned very quickly what an amazing culture of Holden experts, angels, people stepping up to help provide expertise and knowledge we have. And so we've had a lot of people that we've been able to reach out to through all of this when we have questions that come up around specific systems or specific issues. And so thank you for asking us this question. It very much speaks to the culture that we've already observed at Holden. There's a couple of specific topics that we're really exploring. As Bjorn has shared, there's a lot that we're doing around wildfire preparation. And so we're convening a small group of folks who have expertise in fire and emergency response, also understanding Holden systems to help us really hone in on our plans for that. Also with the knowledge that the program by which the road is going to be fixed is going to fall under CERCLA law rather than just standard Forest Service law. We're reaching out to folks who were very much a part of the mine remediation negotiations to help us understand more about Holden's role, Holden's what our stake is in understanding what's going on around the CERCLA projects. And we're also, hope to soon use this opportunity to reconvene the Science and Technology Committee. We know that committee was responsible for a lot of the really innovative systems that we have at Holden, like the hydro plant. And there's a lot of opportunity to think about those systems, new systems that could well serve the village in the future. So that's definitely one that we're looking to restart when the time is right.
Yeah, I would only add a couple others that we know. There continues to be a group that supports the development and advancement work at Holden Village. We have there's ad hoc folk, and then there's just people who are showing up to volunteer and help in different ways. And I know like Steve Johnson, our ops manager, has been reaching out to a whole variety of folks to really understand, okay, under what circumstances can we shut down pieces of the village and these systems that have been built? And sometimes the quick answer is you can't shut these off. Well, what if we have to? Or what if we're faced with this scenario? And that community of experts has been creatively thinking about how to do that well as, in addition. So there's a lot of different ways that people are showing up. There are people here in the Chelan Wenatchee area that help us navigate our um, uh, logistics for bringing people in and out of the valley. There was a work party, like a kind of like a work week, a work weekend at the B&B this weekend. So people continue to be involved, and then of course helping put on all these different events has been incredible. So I would say there's ad hoc work being done by experts and specialists, even if it's not always committee work. But it really points to the whole collection of Holden Village pulling together in this time.
Thank you. I'll just supplement that, and then we'll bring this to a close since we're running out of time. For those who are interested in serving on an ad hoc group or a regular board committee, you should know that board committees are made up of board members and people who are not board members, many of whom are specialists in one area or another where we desperately need that. So just by all means, drop an email to our executive directors who will forward it on to me if it applies to a board committee, and I will be in touch with you. So please do that. As far as the whole matter of expertise, I'll simply close by saying that Holden's entered into, within the last decade, a whole new era of compliance issues, more thorny and complicated issues having to do with human HR, more complicated issues having to do with risk management, et cetera. And so just to give you some of the examples of what the board has done over the last 10 years, we now do have a full-time advancement director and a vigorously working advancement committee. We now have a law firm. For years, Jim Hushagen gave generously of his time and expertise to Holden as its legal advisor, but we've now engaged, as Jim has retired, an entire firm that has a whole array of legal services, many of which we have drawn upon recently. We have a risk management committee, which examines a whole number of thorny issues that leak into the whole area of insurance and so forth and so on that we did not have before. And those are just a few of the things the board has done. I mean, the work of the investment committee that Bjorn alluded to earlier in engaging a firm that's been very kind to Holden and provided very good services. And in the market we've experienced, that revenue has come in very handily. So the board has been very vigorous in appointing more expertise to manage the revenue streams, as well as this whole other array of things that we never used to care as much about, especially the whole area of human relations and compliance with Washington state labor law when we have people working off site and on and on. I'm ending here by telling you too much down in the weeds to put you to sleep and send you off. But I want to reiterate again my gratitude to all of you and the board. I'm speaking on behalf of the board's gratitude to all of you for devoting this time to participate in this conversation. And I'd like to bring this to a close by inviting all of you to join together with me in the Holden prayer. If you could put that up. Lord God, you have called your servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths as yet untrodden, through perils unknown. Give us faith to go out with good courage, not knowing where we go, but only that your hand is leading us and your love supporting us through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you all.